Danny. Let's talk about some dumb stuff. So I want I just want to talk about what I think is gonna happen to the game. So the Mecha Frieza or Goku Storm. I want to call it Goku Storm. If it gets coined Goku Storm, I'll be happy. It feels like it. It's fun. Uh, so this deck is obviously everyone's concern and gripe now. So it started off with Chain Attack Trunks into Babidi that goes into Goku GTs. And that was like a turn two, make a pretty unbeatable board state. But that board state doesn't really get as countered as something like this. So that was reasonable. They nerfed the problem card and not Chain Attack Trunks, which they made a good errata. That was I think it was correct. It's our rest in peace Babidi, but you know it was probably the correct call. And then Android 13 came up, which definitely needed an errata. They just chose poor wording on that. Makes sense. Nerf it to the ground. They changed Cold Bloodlust, so they kind of changed how the counterplay stack works. So Cold Bloodlust and Crusher Ball kind of got a nerf in those scenarios, and this all happened in like less than a month. So they are trying to, I guess, change the game as fast as they possibly can. A lot of their mistakes felt like it was all set 2 related for obvious reasons. I mean, the Cold Bloodlust one was set 1, but Cold Bloodlust wasn't a problem card in set 1. Everybody, if you played set 1, it was like Brawly and Vegeta were kind of like the problem cards. But it's weird if you go back to set 1 tournaments and people got to play with it a lot more, because I think I didn't play set 1 that long, but there was just like clear, obvious, play Vegeta or play Brawly. Those are, or like Champa was also a really good deck. But I think if you went back to set 1, you'd be seeing starter deck Goku and Ginyu a little bit more, I would feel like. So Cold Bloodlust would be a little bit more apparent, but it wasn't as good because the only, Necrotal or come into play kill something card was like Beerus. Then everything else was kind of just play as aggressive as possible. But it was more fun format because it was hand management, so that's why Vegeta was really good, because Vegeta drew cards while denying you cards. That's why he was probably the strongest leader. So set 1, they didn't really fuck anything up. Set 1 was fine. Set 2 was kind of like a fairly strong power creep, where a lot of power came out. Set 2 introduced cards that either they introduced cards that are extremely powerful compared to the cards from set 1. Set 1, if you ever play set 1 tournaments, the games lasted a decent amount of time because of like how paced the game was. But the game was paced pretty nicely. And then set 2, it kind of changed a lot more, where the only decks that kind of kept the set 1 pace was like starter deck Goku kept a set 1 pace, but everything else just ramped up a lot faster. With introduction of cards like Kale, Babidi, Cell, and like Buhan, Ghost Tanks, things that Babidi goes into, stuff like that. Set 2 kind of ramped up the power, where games were going potentially a little bit faster. Then the Mecha Frieza got announced, and that's when things got a little out of control. So Mecha Frieza has always been like this busted leader. The biggest thing that they did is making Cold. So Cold Bloodlust is a Frieza's Army card, and there's only 4 Frieza's Army leaders. There's Mecha Frieza, Frieza, well, Mecha Frieza, the Untapped Frieza, Golden Frieza, and Ginyu. So previously, Ginyu was an okay deck. Tricolor Ginyu was probably where you want to put like the Cold Bloodlust deck at. It was fair. It did what it wanted to do. Didn't feel too oppressive. And then they just printed a leader that does things 100% better than Ginyu. So Mecha Frieza was just, I feel like there was a huge power creep between Ginyu and Mecha Frieza, where they both kind of have like the take life control deck, but one can play their spells for free, while the other one had to play more defensive cards and take their life to 4. So some of the Tricolor Ginyu decks were playing more blockers, like Goldo you would play 4 of, because you need yellow mana, Pivotal Defense Force. It's a really strong blocker. It's also yellow, so you can play as yellow mana. And then you had Mecha Frieza that came out where it's just like, I don't even need yellow mana. So you cut down on probably 7 cards out of your deck that you can fill in with stronger options. So set 2 power creep was extremely apparent. just the introduction of Cell was also just like, oh, well, yeah, that's a fun problem. Cell was this problem that only got put into check due to Mecha Frieza. I think Cell would be running a lot more rampant, because like the Cell versus Ginyu matchup is a little bit different than the Cell versus Mecha Frieza matchup. So I think Cell versus Ginyu, I think Red-Green Cell has a fairly decent matchup against Ginyu because they're taking life, while the Cell players just playing Kabas and aggressive things and gaining more card advantage. And then also if they go into the Cell chain, if they hit it, it's great. And also if you force your opponent to tap out by playing some bigger threat that they need to deal with, then you can just Cell chain. But what Mecha Frieza prevented is you're never going to Cell chain. Your opponent just has to get really unlucky to not draw one of the 4 copies of their card, and then Cell's never going to happen if they draw one of them. So the Mecha Frieza introduced a layer of unknown threats, which was, in my opinion, it's not the greatest thing for game design. I feel like the ability should have been activate main once per turn. If they did that, I think it would be a little bit better. Being able to play aggressive, like if you did activate main once per turn, take a life, reduce a cost of a card, I feel like that's where you would be making a more balanced leader, where you're still technically better than Ginyu, but you still have to play like you are Ginyu. Where you can only take potentially 1 life a turn instead of you can, awaken yourself on turn 1. Now, if you nerf Mecha Frieza to a point of unbelief, so let's say you nerf Mecha Frieza to what I just said. If you made it activate main once per turn, I think a lot of people would be okay with that. It forces you to play Cold Bloodlust how Cold Bloodlust was intended to be played, where if you see your opponent with 1 yellow mana open, you got to be on your toes a little bit of how you're playing. So it just warps your thought process of how you're supposed to be playing cards. That's completely fine. If you ever played any form of game with tricks in it, that's a possibility. And it makes you a better player to play around it. Now, playing against unknown threats also makes you a better player. And it also feels a lot better to get the hard reads. But they're very annoying, very not user-friendly. And also they pigeonhole some decks into, I have to play this, knowing it's going to get Cold Bloodlusted. So the next threat I'll potentially play doesn't get Cold Bloodlusted, and hopefully that's good enough to win the game. So when you're making your opponent play a turn behind while you're still playing a control deck, so when your opponent's playing the proactive deck while you're playing the control deck, and then your opponent has to play the turn behind, instead of the control deck playing the turn behind to keep your opponent in check. That's where you get a this leader's really good factor. um, so that's like the biggest problem with Mecha Frieza is it warps card design very awfully. So, for instance, and this is an argument that everybody made. I've said it before, where it's just like I think Mecha Frieza needs to get banned or rewarded because it's going to limit future card design. Where they're not going to accidentally just break the fucking game. So, what they did in set 3 is they printed 1 mana extra cards that are busted. So, Planet Vegeta is probably one of the best cards that's ever been printed. Only because Mecha Frieza exists. If Mecha Frieza didn't exist, Planet Vegeta would still be kind of good. You can play like Bardock and then just like tutor for Kales or whatever. You know, that deck would be like in the power limit. But the thing is you can't play Bardock when decks like any kind of deck that's going to be rushing out Kales, any kind of deck that's going to be rushing out, you know, like when I showed the SSJ3 Goku deck that kind of does exactly what the Goku Storm deck does, but without the secret rare, and it just like plays as blue-red, I start with 2 mana kind of deck, and I get to play really, really aggressive on you. I'm going to flip early because I'm playing 4 Kabas, that kind of shit. Oh fuck, I lost word. But oh yeah. So a lot of the yellow decks, when you're paying 1 mana to tutor, while your opponent is paying 1 mana to awaken on turn 1, there's going to be a little bit of an imbalance there, and it just feels like it's poor card design and poor pacing. If your opponent awakens on turn 1, their card advantage gets a little significant. The thing that I think they messed up a little bit with is the 6 mana Goku, seeing as he starts with 6 life and he awakens to draw 2 cards, but he does deny himself 2 cards. Okay, never mind. That Goku deck I think is perfectly fine. Also, they're not yellow, so they don't get to play control cards. They don't get to play like Cold Bloodlust and Planet Vegeta. But they can, but it's not as good as being a yellow leader that can play Cold Bloodlust as well. So I recant that statement in the middle of this. The Goku leader I think is fine. It could be very aggressive. It could be very bursty. But the only deck that keeps it really in check would be a deck like Mecha Frieza or a deck like Ginyu. People are talking about like turn 1 Buhans, which I think I'm curious on how people are doing that with the Goku, if people are doing it with the Goku leader. Yeah, I don't know. But overall, I think Mecha Frieza is terrible for game design in terms of, or card design, I should say, because you could play the colors of the rainbow while your opponent is sitting there, you know, having to actually make risks. Now, a deck like this would be okay if they printed kind of like interruption. So there's nothing that really interrupts extra cards whatsoever, but they need to print like a duress card specifically for leaders that I think can deal with certain threats. Being able to play a card to look at your opponent's hand to discard a card really keeps these kind of combo decks in check, or keeps like these really bursty decks in check. Because normally they have to draw a hand of some sort, and then that hand is very easily interruptible because of the multiple utilities. So if you would print something like let's say you printed a card, 1 green, if your leader's an android, look at your, well, of course that has to be an android, look at your opponent's hand, choose 1 extra card from it and send it to the drop area. So if they printed a card like that and you played it against Mecha Frieza, so you can pay 1 green, look at your opponent's hand, take like their Planet Vegeta or take their Monica, so they're not drawing a bunch of cards to try to awaken themselves, and they also can't tutor. So now their deck is just becoming a pile. It's not becoming something that's going to be going off on you. When you interrupt those combo pieces, also you deny your opponent a card. Things like that really keep these bursty control or not control, bursty combo decks in check. Also, it gives control elements to other colors outside of yellow. Yellow is currently the only color that can ever deal with this. You know, everyone's answers has been Cold Bloodlust, Shigesh into Goku. And Cold Bloodlust isn't even the best answer because they can go off on you on the next turn unless you have the removal spell. So 3-mana Monica might be not the worst thing on the planet. But Crusher Ball, Cold Bloodlust, Shigesh into Goku. Then everyone else's argument is Mafuba. Mafuba is a card that's only limited to 1 leader. So only the SSJ3 Goku can do that on turn 1, while this deck can kill you on turn 2, and fairly consistently. Like, consistent enough to be scary. And then a lot. I'm surprised nobody said Peel Off. Peel Off, I think, would be another one, because Peel Off, I think, takes away a skill. So you could take away the Activate main on the SSJ4 of letting him untap, and then hopefully you can untap and kill it. But that's a thing. It's if you're stuck on 1 mana and you do that and you just open up on 2 mana, there's no terrors in this game. You know, there's nothing that says destroy target non-X color battle card as an extra card that costs 2. The closest thing you got is the 3-mana Monica on the blue, so you'd have to be playing blue, or Brawly would be, I guess, another one, the 3-mana Brawly, or I guess if you're androids, you can play the Android 14, the one that's like Son Goten Family of Justice, that I guess would deal with it if they don't have literally anything else, which they probably do, because if you're playing Pint Size, you have something you could sacrifice. If they're playing Kabbas to help themselves awaken, they have something to sacrifice to stuff like that. So there's a lot of problems everywhere. But that's, I guess, how they deal with this. I'm going to be very curious about. The way that I described wouldn't be the worst way. It would make Planet Vegeta still a really good card, but it won't make it as good as it is right now. It's a tutor that lets you take a life, which in a deck that doesn't really care about its life total, it's more like plussing a card, because life total is irrelevant when you're trying to kill your opponent on turn 2, where not a lot of bad stuff can happen to you. But if Mecha Frieza doesn't get nerfed, I feel like the meta is just going to be people playing Goku Storm or people playing Mecha Frieza so they don't get donked by Goku Storm. And then there's going to be people that's just going to be trying to play their brews. And those people that are playing the brews might have an okay matchup. Like, okay is like a 40-60 matchup against the Mecha Frieza deck that's not playing Goku Storm, and then just like a dreadful matchup against the people who are playing Goku Storm. Because the kicker about this deck is what you can sideboard into after you get a game 1 win. When your opponent's trying to sideboard in, you know, Mafubas and stuff like that, stuff to punish, like you're low, like getting to low life and stuff like that, you can just board in 15 other cards. That makes you more of a mid-range control deck, where you're not really focused on killing your opponent in turn 1, where you're more trying to play the mid-range game where your opponent is now lacklustering because they try to counter your deck. Somebody made the argument of that they're gonna say that this deck is gonna be kind of the way it's explained to me is like a Necropotence format. I don't know much about the Necropotence format other than the horror stories of it. If you ever played Magic, they printed a card called Necropotence. It was a card that got really out of control, where it was you play Necropotence or you play the deck that maybe can beat Necropotence. That's like sometimes as bad as Magic gets, and then it's fixed itself obviously fairly well. But when there's going to be a deck that's going to be if this deck does come out and people are going to think it's as dominant as it is right now, I feel if you go to a big event, you won't run into it as much as you would think, because a lot of people are deck loyalists. So keep that in mind for anyone that goes to big tournaments. Don't fall for the hype. If you're going to play a deck that's just has a good matchup against this deck and then like a 40-60 matchup against every other matchup, you're gonna not have as great as a time, because there's a chance that you're only gonna play this deck twice the whole entire day, and then every single time you don't play it, it's a hard game for you. The best example I can give to that is I played in I played a 900 person Grand Prix in Magic where there was clearly a best deck in the format. I think it was 30-ish, 40-ish% of the field, somewhere in there. And I only played against it twice that day. I was playing the deck. I only played the mirror twice in a 15 rounds. So sometimes you just never play against it. Sometimes you're going to be playing against it all day. It's best to prepare for every other matchup, but also just like keep a low key, I have a good matchup against this. So I guess I guess that's how I feel about this deck. If it becomes a problem, it'll be interesting. If it doesn't become a problem because everybody has to play yellow to counter it, and then everybody plays yellow, and then it's just like play yellow or don't win the game. We'll see. There's people that could just play Vegeta and just deal 2 damage to their opponent right off the bat, and hopefully they can't die on the next crackback. Something silly like that. Just like denying them 2 cards with a Furthering Destruction Champa. That's a thing. Like this deck can't really like combo any other cards away. So if you critical 2 life of theirs on turn 1, so like let's say you're on the draw and you're playing Vegeta. If you go on your turn 1, just like land, take a life, attack, Furthering Destruction Champa, deny your opponent 2 cards. You just potentially like created them doing 2 less damage with the Secret Rare Goku, something like that. But I feel like so the best thing is Mecha Frieza narrowed the game, where if you're gonna play yellow, you only have 1 leader choice, and there's no other choice. Especially now when there's a power creep. They printed busted cards. The Goku GT cards are actually outrageous. You can get them out really fast. They're super good. And they impact the board very, very, very well. And there's no other yellow leader that really compares to it, because there's nothing that has to make you like Yellow Saiyan Loyalist that's worth playing. And then the next thing is Planet Vegeta was a mistake of a card. When you have a card like Mecha Frieza in the meta, Planet Vegeta just allows you to tutor anything in your deck, basically. That's why I'm playing 2 Kabbas and 1 Trunks, where if I draw every other combo piece and I just need to dig more, then I'm going to Planet Vegeta for my Trunks. And then I get to I get to replace that card with 1 or 2 cards on top of my deck, so I'm just digging for the Secret Rare a lot faster. Just stupid stuff like that. Hopefully this gives a little bit of insight of how I kind of feel about it and what you should be considering when you make the argument about it. If you just immediately go onto the bandwagon of I lost to this deck once, so I know it's busted, you should try to expand your thoughts and try to see if you could figure out how to beat it. And then if you start beating it consistently with a certain deck, you got to see if that deck can beat other decks, and if it then has problems with other decks, then you know you have a problem. You can't make a deck, then have an anti-meta deck that loses to every other deck. Because, you know, this isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! This is more Magic. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is where anti-meta decks can maybe make it. But Magic, that doesn't exist. Magic, you have triangles. Yu-Gi-Oh! You have a circle. There's just, you can play whatever the fuck you want, and sometimes it'll do what it needs to do. But then sometimes in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have literally a dot where it's just one deck. But yeah, I mean, comment, whatever. You can call me an idiot. I'd probably deserve it. There's probably something I don't know. There's probably something that you're smarter about. Just from my knowledge with card games, especially dealing with Magic now when they're banning everything and they give their reasonings for banning everything. I can kind of see a trend pretty quickly where when it comes from my locals, everybody hates playing against Mecha Frieza because, you know, it's just playing against 0 mana counter spells is just not fun. But I think the deck in set 2 was all right. I think it was still probably the best deck that's ever been. Like, it was the best leader by far. And also attuned to some of the best decks that could have been created at the set 2, which was a power creep. Set 3, they just made it worse. So you created a card that's just creating exponential problems. So my thoughts, either errata it or ban it. Either or, I'm okay with it. Activate main once per turn. That would probably be the best errata. Or just straight up ban it and never see it again. Either way, I'm cool with both of them. It doesn't really bother me. I just get to play another deck. I do like this deck because it's my combo play style, but also it's a problem deck because there's not enough answers. If they printed more answers to people who can play silly combo decks, yeah, all on board. Don't care. But if they don't, then this deck's just going to be really good, and the only counter to it is itself, in terms of a different variant of Mecha Frieza, but the only leader to counter Mecha Frieza is Mecha Frieza. Then you just get into this cycle of just like, when the next set comes out, how do we exploit Mecha Frieza? So, yep, that's my thoughts. Comment, anything, do whatever you want. I'll reply to everything. I probably rambled a little bit, and I probably got sidetracked on a lot of things that I was saying. So if I sound like an idiot, I sound like an idiot. You got me. But yeah, take it easy.